We have a little bit of time for questions and discussions, if people would like. Joe, I see you have a question right off the bat.
I need to cut off other people, but yeah, thanks for both of those, and I really appreciated them, and I'm really interested in the way that the structure of presentation of capital in particular, as you presented, Elena, how it relates to the structure of understanding as a kind of temporal process, as dialectics always implies some kind of temporality. But I guess I wanted to push a little bit on the discussion of whether and why, whether it's appropriate, and then why the labor theory of value should or shouldn't be at the beginning of capital. Because it seems to me that there are kind of two ways we could look at the structure of capital. We could see it as a structure, the book Capital, of moving from appearances to essences, or from essences to appearances. And when Marx starts with the labor theory of value, which is more the essence, but he also starts with the commodity, which is the appearance. And my way of reading it is more to see that he starts with the commodity, and then we finally delve into labor, which explains the commodity. But for some reason, labor also comes up at the beginning, along with the commodity. And it seems to me there's a kind of tension. Which way are we narrating the story? That I'm not sure if.
Can I just get to this point, because this is a super. Thank you for this question. This is right at the heart of a certain tension, as you say. But I think so. What I think is this: Marx's presentation starts with the commodity, okay, and he says in the introduction to the contributions to the critique of political economy, because he wanted to imitate the language of the English economists. But at the same time, he didn't want to stop at just imitating the language of the economists, so he had to provide a certain tool at the same time, and it's very closely related. Actually, he starts with the labor theory of value and then moves to the commodity, if you look very closely. So what he does, he jumps right into the deep end, and he gives us the tool. He makes a definition that he cannot prove at this point of the presentation. And we have to sort of keep this definition in mind to understand the following argument. So he imitates the English economists by starting with the commodity, but we have already understood that the value of a commodity does not consist in exchange. So keeping that in mind, we can much better follow value form analysis that he conducts in section 3 of chapter 1. Because if he didn't provide, let's turn it around, if he didn't provide the labor theory of value and explain the quality and the quantity of value, we wouldn't be able to follow the analysis of the value form. So it's a little bit, it's like an unproven presupposition, as I said, but at the same time, we have to bear with Marx. We have to stay with him and I'm not really convinced at this point, but let's see where he's getting at. And yeah, it grows. So he starts from essence, very small essence, and then he moves right to the appearance. But he says, let's bear this in mind. This is why I compared it to this machine, to the bombe of Alan Turing. He provides a deciphering mechanism in order to move from the total surface to the depths of the problem. So I think this is the way to understand this tension between essence and appearance, or the concrete and the abstract.
Sort of foreshadows what will eventually be more of the conclusion.
Yeah, it's not that we say, oh yes, of course, I totally agree with Marx in the first 20 pages of Capital. I don't think that anyone could agree with what Marx says in the first 20 pages. But the funny thing is, when you've read all 3 volumes or all the manuscripts, and you go back to the beginning, to the commodity, you say, yeah, now I'm convinced. I think so, at least.
Well, thank you as well for your presentation. I have as well a question, well, one remark and one question now. The remark is on what you said and the last thing you said about why you gave us the Trinitarian formula to read. And about as well about that what you said that Marx wants to imitate more or less the English political economists. There, it actually especially the part on the Trinitarian formula is a good example for this, because it's somehow not a parody but an analysis actually of how Ricardo starts his political economy. Because the first page of Ricardo's political economy is exactly about the sources of revenue and everything, of course on a very superficial level.
You're talking about Smith, not Ricardo.
No, it's Ricardo. Ricardo starts his theory of political economy. He starts as well with this analysis, which is actually really an analysis.
You're talking about the principle of political economy and taxation from 1817?
Ricardo, yeah. It's at the beginning.
The beginning is the definition of value against Smith. That is the source of the definition
Well, it's
of
the
value.
introduction, but it's very at the beginning. Sorry, but it's
Fourth chapter. Okay.
But it's a central chapter.
Yeah, okay,
but it's
okay.
more or less he ends there where
I'm sorry.
where Ricardo starts basically. The other thing is not a question. So this was just to underscore what you said actually. The other question is you said that Marx starts with essence basically now, if I understood you correctly, in the beginning of Capital. But this is now really at the beginning, the first sentence of Capital, Marx talks about that the wealth appears.
Yes.
So how would you, what do you say to this? Or
Yes, of course, and you're right. So it is about, the chapter is called The Commodity, right? So commodity and money. And that's true. I don't think that is, he wants to take the reader somehow right into the problematic of what is going on. So he starts in some way, he starts with the appearance. But then after 3 pages, he smuggles in this labor theory of value that we cannot really connect with it, but he has to place it somewhere. So I think it's more for like didactic reasons that he didn't starts with definitions. Also because I think this has something to do with Hegel again. Hegel never makes definitions. And this is why it's so difficult to follow Hegel. And also like that, Marx is very hesitant to make definitions, but he wants to take, so to speak, the reader by the hand and present him with the immediacy of the appearances. So yes, but then again, he has to somehow introduce this tool, the labor theory of value, right, in the context of the most superficial appearance, which is commodity exchange. So somehow, maybe you should have started with the definitions. Would we have been happier about this? I don't know. So he starts with the appearance. Wealth appears, as, this, which is of course it is not, and a titanic pile of commodities. Ungeheure Warensammlung is the German term, and yes. So there's a tension between essence and appearance. I think that was because Marx was really not very happy with giving definitions, but at the same time, he felt the need to give a heuristic framework of what is going to happen in the next 8,000 pages of manuscripts that he has not yet prepared at this stage. But thank you for the question.
If I may, Argon, I'd like to ask you a question. I think the concept of structural causality is so important, and we didn't have time maybe to discuss it fully, and so I'm very curious if you might say a little bit more about this idea that Althusser's concept of structural causality is actually in some sense presented already in Hegel.
Yeah, that's the point. Thank you. That's the point that Beatrice Lange makes, and then Hegel takes, Zizek takes it from there, because the whole point of Althusser is to go against the ground with this structural causality. He thinks that Hegel's totality is a point in which there is no contradiction. Antagonisms are solved, and all the rest of it. And it comes in part and we were discussing about this, it comes in part due to his Spinozism, as it were, and the point is that Althusser's, both Hegel and Spinoza are very, very, very strange, like I think if you read, for instance, his master thesis, well, I think it's still worth the content on thought in Hegel, how is it called? Or for instance, the text where he reviews Kojève's reading of Hegel are not the Althusser you get like a decade later. So my point is that the problem he had is that he thought of the absolute as a stage in which everything will be in some sort of a peaceful state.
Identity.
In other words, but then
it's Kojève's Hegel, right?
Yeah, but then which is very, very paradoxical because Hegel also like Hegel's totality is totality plus the excesses, that which cannot be circled in the square or whatever. So I think he gets this at the point when Le Brun published this book. When he starts, because it was actually the first was Le Brun who criticized from the Hegelian perspective of the ground, the point of structural causality. So I really think, because then he gives up on it, if you remember from the self-criticism onwards. So
Right.
I really think that he was struggling within the Hegelian terrain, trying to fight Hegel with Hegelian
With Kojève and
with
yeah.
Kojève, or
Yeah.
even with
and
Hegel
against
himself,
Kojève at the same time.
Yeah, it's quite a paradoxical. But at one point, then he gives up completely on dialectical materialism. He goes as far as to call it yellow pages. How was it in the interview with Fernanda?
That's right.
No,
In the 80s.
in the 80s, yeah. I think it was yellow pages thing. So it's he was like knocking on the open door because it was already there. What he was at the end, ultimately, what he was trying to do.
That's right. Maybe we have time for one or two more questions. Michael.
I have a question for Agon. I follow up to the previous debates, and my question is, you summed up highly the concept of dialectical materialism by Slavoj Žižek, but what I find troublesome in the very concept of dialectical materialism, as was elaborated by Slavoj Žižek, is the fact that the concept of essence is conceived as to appear on the surface phenomena. It corresponds to Marx to some extent, but the key point is whether the appearance of essence is merely contingent, or there is a logic of appearance. I consider it the key question in the context of the Marxian political economy. As we have heard from Elena, there is a value form and an evolution of exchange value and so on. I think that according to Marx, this evolution is not only contingent, that we can find some law or tendencies in their evolution, and how to reconcile to political economy with Žižek's dialectical materialism concerning the issue of contingency in the appearance of essence?
Well, first I think, thank you for this. I think that the first move that Zizek does is to recognize our situation that is more closer to the Hegelian moment than rather than the Marx one, because Marx was writing for the revolution to come, whereas Hegel was writing for the revolution that was already done. And he claims that we are in such a situation right now when we have to really understand what is going on. As for contingency, I think Elena said that Hegel was reluctant to to give definitions, but there is another thing here, and I wonder if you agree, that Hegel is a critical philosopher without critiquing. You know, like he never goes beyond. The surface is the level of appearance is what he tries to work. The difference between the understanding and the reason, because reason is not to go beyond the understanding, but it's just what understanding was doing, but was not aware of what it has done. So I think this would sum it up in a way. What Zizek means with dialectics. I think that he is ultimately much more critical towards Marx, and he said it explicitly in all of his work that the point is to subordinate Marx to Hegel and read Marx from the perspective of Hegel himself. And in this sense, I don't know if there is an evolutionary system in Marx, but it's certainly what Zizek, if there was, Zizek would completely reject it from the Hegelian standpoint.
But can I add something to that? It's so important to again and again emphasize Hegel's critique of understanding, especially in Kantian, but Fichtean philosophy, and to contrast it with reason. And as you said, there is something in understanding. It's not totally false. It's not totally wrong.
It doesn't dismiss it completely as it is being
exactly.
right.
That's what I would just want to stress that. I wanted to stress that. But it's indicative of a deeper problematic, if you will. But I think, and I want to speak for Marx here, what Hegel does with Kant and with Fichte, Marx does with Smith and Ricardo. Smith and Ricardo were not totally rejected by Marx. Marx said they were the esoteric. And what does esoteric mean in this context? It means they grasp the inner relations, the inner connections of the capitalist system, but eventually they lost the trade because they stayed at the surface and they started to talk about price instead of value and so on. And so I think you can parallelize Hegel's critique of Kant, the understanding, to bring out the reason in the understanding, with Marx's critique of, for example, Marx's critique of Ricardo is so interesting because he says the problem with Ricardo is not that he was a too superficial thinker. The problem with Ricardo was that he was too deep a thinker.
But that was with Kant as well.
What did he mean by that?
No.
He said he's always making up these laws. Ricardo is, and he's trying to adjust the phenomena of the real world to these laws. Of course, then everything falls into place. If you proceed like that. So I think this is pretty much what Hegel does with
But even Kant. When you think about Kant, like, the unknowable thing, when it seems as
the object in itself.
Yeah, like, we cannot know it. The move, as it's sometimes portrayed, is not that Hegel tells Kant, no, I will show you that we can know the thing in itself. No, the very obstacle is the solution itself for Hegel, and this is what we should insist on, I believe. But this is too much of a long discussion.
But this is important. That the appearance is not just false. Essence must appear. So in the appearance is something we have to hold on to and explore, because otherwise that would be a notion of total ideology, as Althusser would have it. I'm not a big fan, as is probably obvious. But then we would have no way to proceed. And I think Althusser, he's starting with the dead end. And maybe you can put it dialectically, say, yes, starting with the dead end is precisely where the cognition comes in, but I don't think so, because he totalizes the concept of ideology and identity, and this totalizing effect on cognition. I think it really is an obstacle for Althusser to proceed in a critical reflection on his actual object of inquiry. So, but okay, that's
but
just
you get Kant without the transcendental there. But anyway.
That would be a separate question.
I think maybe we'll hold questions there. Thank you, both our speakers, very much. We'll take a quick break, maybe 10 minutes or so, and come back for the next session. So.